everyone, and welcome to the Auto Guide Show. This week we talk tariffs, why Honda and Nissan fell out, Volkswagen does a 180, and a whole bunch more. But first, a word from our sponsor. Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay, because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything: brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need, and it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need, at the prices you'll love, guaranteed fit every time. eBay, things people love. Okay, so we'll dig in with the big review we had this week. It happened to fall on a time when neither Kyle and I were able to do it. And for those of you watching and those of you listening, we'll find out in a second. Kyle isn't with us this week. He's probably in a snowbank somewhere. So we have Greg filling in to do the whole show with me. So thank you and welcome, Greg.
Hey, Mike. It's fun to be here. I love podcasting on a Friday afternoon. Got some good stuff to talk about. Kyle's probably having a wild day, so I'm glad to be in my nice, warm studio, such as it is.
And it's weird. It's not snowing, and there's this glowing orange thing in the sky today. It's very unusual. Still very cold.
Check my iPhone. It says it's sunny. Is that a thing? It's actually sunny. I need to check what that is. It's crazy.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like it outside. Anyway, getting on with the info. So, as I was saying, the first drive of the heavily refreshed Ioniq 5 for 2025, we sent our freelancer because Kyle and I were busy, and that went live this week. And judging from his review, I mean, the title basically says it, a really good EV, one of the best, just got better. So you think that's an easy thing to do, but sometimes manufacturers mess with things and they make them worse. But it sounds like the tech and styling upgrades are welcome. They didn't really mess around too much with the drivetrains, which they didn't need to. It's now got the plug that can use a North American charging standard, so the Tesla station. So that's a big plus if you're owning one of these and not a Tesla owner. And of course the XRT, which I really want to try. I know it's a very mild off-roader, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah, I think these are really significant upgrades for the Ioniq 5. I think it really is. We used to kind of look at like refreshes, mid-cycle refreshes, redesigns. As car journalists, we always try to slice and dice those. And it seems like we've gotten pretty casual as far as what's actually a really significant redesign. But this is legit. There's a lot of, the goods that you just mentioned. And I can't wait to drive it, especially the XRT trim. I think that's been a very savvy move for Hyundai to add to their different vehicles. They're kind of scaling it and making it different shapes and sizes. I think it's really good for I'll call it almost like suburban overlanding. You don't really need like a Wrangler or a Land Cruiser to go to the mall, but people want that. Same with something like, from Hyundai. And this just kind of gives you just a little bit more. Although I did find it interesting, James Riswick wrote in his review, he's like, still managed to bottom it out a little bit. Car was fine. It's a tough car or crossover, depending on, I guess, what you want to call this thing, hatchback. So it's definitely up for taking a beating.
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying how that sort of off-road overland image is so popular. And EVs, like when they came out, they were low rolling resistance tires and keep the power down, maximize range. And it's kind of at the point with manufacturers. I mean, Kyle and I have talked about this a lot. The range is more than okay on almost every EV, just people really focus on it. So they've kind of realized people are going to do that no matter what. So let's not worry so much about getting every mile out and make them cooler. And you have the Ioniq 5 alone. You have the N that's still technically a crossover, even though it's like a sports car. And now you have the XRT, which I could see it doesn't raise it too much, but I think it's just the cool all-terrain tires. And you can get into those rougher hiking spots, then maybe you couldn't.
Well, James points out that it's 7 inches of ground clearance. So it's not a ton, but it's, if you're going to like the trail to the lake or something, it's not bad. For comparison, the V60, the V60 cross country only has about 8 inches of ground clearance. So, they did some things to it to make it a little rough and tougher, if you will. And, I still think the Ioniq 5, even if they hadn't upgraded it like they did, I would still have no problem recommending this as one of the better electric vehicles you could buy. I think it's right in the conversation top 5 easily. When people ask me like, what EV should I buy? And I'm like, well, there's 3 Hyundai Motor Co. EVs. This one, the EV6, and the Ioniq 6, sort of as far as like kind of mid-size-ish, affordable-ish. I always mention this one. And this has always been kind of my personal favorite for the almost like the 1980s styling. It's got that kind of like, Tron styling. I think they've even said that a 1970s concept from, I think, Giugiaro inspired this whole sort of lineup. So I'm there for that. I like it. It's definitely my, Gen X, Gen Y generation. So I like the styling. I think they're a lot of fun to drive too. I think the Ioniq 5 it's a little more my silhouette as opposed to, say, the swoopy teardrop Ioniq 6.
Not the Oldsmobile silhouette. So Kyle and I did a big comparison of this class 2 summers ago now. And I remember last summer, I can't remember. But anyway, we both commented on how the Nero EV is such a good package for the affordable. But of the 8 vehicles we had there, this was his favorite, and mine was the EV6, which, I mean, same thing, different looks. I just like the wagon look better. But yeah, it's good to hear this is better, and we're going to have to put it up against some of the newcomers in a future comparison.
I think I'm right there with you. EV6, Ioniq 5, flip a coin, you're not going to go wrong. Both really, really good EVs.
And the 6 gets updates this year too, so it's promising that they'll be the same. So staying on the topic of EVs, Mercedes has come out and finally said that they are going to keep one styling direction for all their vehicles. As people know, probably have been paying attention the last couple of years, their gas-powered cars or regular hybrids look like Mercedes. And I mean, Mercedes, BMW, Audi, none of them ever drastically change their styling because that's what people want. Well, Mercedes brought out their EQ all-electric line, and they were very different. They were very bubbly. The grille was still there visually, but it obviously didn't need one, so it didn't do anything. The SUVs kind of looked awkward. The sedans still did, maybe less so, but they didn't say we're killing this styling and going with the internal combustion styling, but I would assume if they're going one direction, they're going to lean more to their traditional shape.
I may be the only one here. I really liked the bubbly, 1990s Ford Taurus. Boy, that's not the comparison Mercedes is looking for. I like that styling. I really did.
Yeah, if the Taurus shows your benchmark, you're probably not going to be in business long.
Right, the second gen one that nobody liked as much as the first. So,
two Christmases ago, I had the EQE AMG and SUV. And you know what? The styling kind of grew on me over time. And part of it was the wheels. They were just so crazy. But I think they probably looked at, again, their 2 main German rivals. And BMW have different naming conventions, but they're so similar in style. And it says in this article, BMW almost doubled their sales in the US last year. And they sold more than Audi and Mercedes combined. And Audi doesn't stray as much as Mercedes with their electrics. But again, you can always tell it's electric versus their gas. Where, I mean, I think that was the thought back years ago, that you wanted to show the world that an EV and be different. And I think now it's kind of like some people want an EV, but they don't want people to know almost. So, yeah.
Smart move. I mean, as much as I personally like them, and I even sort of give them bonus points, because Mercedes isn't exactly a company that takes a lot of risks, right? This staid German company, oldest car company, 1886. They invented the car, they say. This was a gutsy play. They really did. They went for it. But, I mean, scoreboard, right? Sales numbers. Look at what BMW does. Clearly, especially this type of consumer wants their vehicle to look like a Mercedes. And these didn't really look like Mercedes is the other thing.
And I think they drove pretty well. A lot of people said they didn't, but I think it's just a perception thing where you get in the i4 after driving a 4 Series Grand Coupe or a 3 Series. You're like, oh, it kind of looks the same. Oh, the interior is very familiar. So then you start driving, you're like, okay, yeah, it drives like a regular car, just quietly. Whereas this, people are turned off by the inside and outside so fast. They're now sort of in a negative mindset. So anything else they don't like, they're going to focus. But
it's too much change too.
Yeah. I hope the best for Mercedes in the future, because I like the company, and they make some great products. And we'll talk about one at the end of this podcast. But moving on, this isn't electrics, but it has to do with hybrids still. So, why did Nissan and Honda fall out? Well, we talked earlier on the show a couple weeks ago how Nissan didn't like that Honda wanted them to basically be a subsidiary of the company. And now it comes out that maybe the final nail in the coffin was Honda wanted Nissan to abandon their hybrid technology, basically. And although we don't really get it in North America, it's very popular in Asia and somewhat in Europe. And their new third gen that's coming out this year, maybe next year, it's supposed to, it's basically what the Volt kind of was. They're going to be plugins, and the engine's going to be more as a generator for the batteries that then powers the motor that drives the car than a parallel hybrid, like, 99% of all hybrids currently are. So, I mean, good for them that they want to stick with the investment they made, but as we've said many times, where do they go now?
To me, it seemed like they were, maybe both sides were looking for reasons to try to break this up. Like in this case, it seemed like the fight wasn't really about the hybrids. It was just like, hey, here's a thing we could disagree with and maybe use it as a wedge issue. It didn't really seem like this was going to work out. And for Honda, it's probably a good thing. I think Honda's better off on its own. They don't need the extra market share and the extra headaches that would come along with it. For Nissan, I mean, they're looking for, like, I don't know, maybe some sort of hedge fund or maybe like a mid-level company like a Foxconn or a Magna, a company like that might want to use this to get a toehold. I don't know. I think Nissan's in trouble because their product line right now, I think, is generally pretty soft.
Yeah, like Nissan specifically, the new Murano's decent. Infinity's got some good products, but only like 2 SUVs that are really good, and people have kind of written them off. So now you got to rebuild trust. But you're right. I've said from the very first time this was ever hinted that I figured Honda wanted Nissan's truck technology because they don't really do the body on frame thing, and Nissan has compact to full size overseas, so the Honda could just start pumping out little SUVs and pickups in more countries where they're looking for that more popular. Like a lot of countries don't need F-Series opposed to what North Americans think you must have. But I don't know what Nissan was trying to get out of it except for money. So maybe that was part of it. Or maybe it's just one of those things, two top execs were out partying one night, like, we should get together. And then the next morning, they're like, oh no, we need to break this off. Like a Vegas wedding.
It's not, this seemed like a Vegas wedding that maybe they did it before they ended up at the casino and hungover, and I don't know.
Well, talking about changes, this has been just an episode of changes ever since the first drive. In a surprise to absolutely no one except for the most diehard EV enthusiasts, Volkswagen and Audi and Porsche are all kind of doing a 180 on the we're going to be an EV company. And I mean, this isn't like a drastic, it just came out this week. We've been knowing this for years, and you can just tell by the products and the ones that linger, but now they're kind of officially saying that gas engines will be around past, I think it was 2033. They kept pushing the date back, and it's just the fact of pricing. I mean, I say this every week, but pricing is still too high on EVs to convince someone that they need to switch. If you want an EV and you're ready to switch, then you might take the price. But everyone I know that has a gas car, they're like, oh, I'd love to have an EV, but it costs more than this. And none of them drive enough to ever see that money back. Like if you're doing 50,000 miles a year, well, yeah, you'll make your money back. But these are people who do like 15, 10. So, yeah.
Well, it's funny you bring that up anecdotally. Like the survey we did like last week of people who are thinking of buying an electric vehicle, if you had an EV, it was like 80 to 90% were like, hey, I'll get another one. And if you didn't have an EV, exactly the same opposite result, 80 to 90%, no, thank you. So, hey, you can check that survey on AutoGuide.com, right? But it's no surprise. And I think a company as big as Volkswagen, I was always skeptical of some of their claims. And I think it made a lot of sense. Like, even take geopolitics aside, like, this one-size-fits-all solution was never going to work in all the different markets they play in, because Europe, especially Western Europe, is still heavily diesel. So you have to figure out how you're going to do that. And they knew that. So to me, it almost seemed like they were making these claims to really drum up a lot of support about the technology. And to be fair, Volkswagen has a very solid electric portfolio right now. Like they're well positioned for growth wherever the market levels off at. So they're in a good spot. But to me, it was always like it seemed like they were a little bit overpromising. I didn't really think they were going to do what they said they would.
I mean, we don't know because it's way out of our political and tax bracket, but I think too, they thought when they started this, that's when all the incentives and governments were putting in mandates. They figured it'll just get stricter and tougher, so we might as well get on it. And in fact, it's going the other way because people just don't want it. Like every European city sounded like it was going to ban combustion engines, and some are still going to do that, but it's not like it was. And some of the like Volkswagen, they're still got a good SUV portfolio, but their car portfolio is kind of doesn't exist. I mean, the Jetta is lingering on. I really like the Jetta, but I don't know if there's going to be a next one. The Golf's gone. You can only get the GTI and R now, which again, fantastic cars, but they're not everyone's going to buy the performance. So we'll see. Colin and I've talked about it before, and I've been saying like the next 718 that was going to be all electric. Like I keep saying, I can't imagine it not getting a gas option. And he's been telling me like the new platform and whatnot and the engines they currently use, like none of it would work, but you can always make something new.
I agree.
Figure something out.
Completely, 100%. I drove the 718 last year, convertible, was literally one of my favorite vehicles. I think I drove the entire year. And I came back, it was like May 24th, 5th, somewhere in there, Thursday night, right before a long weekend. We get Memorial Day in the US. And I just spit out a column on it because I was just so psyched about the handling, the drop top, the powertrain, and it was the automatic, the dual clutch transmission. It wasn't even the manual, but it so resonated so deeply with me. So I love EVs, but that's one that I think you want to keep a an ICE engine in it.
Well, even the Macan, like that was going to be just EV, and we already know like it's going to be in parallel to this gas one. And although when the manufacturers say they can't continue a car because of emissions and this and that, some of them I know they can because the engine's like the way it performs, but they can always make a new one or update it. And something like a Boxster or 718, that would be, I would assume, a slightly easier conversion because everything's in one spot kind of over those rear wheels. You don't need a giant drivetrain tunnel from the front. You don't have to rework the front and the back, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
And our last story of the week is about tariffs. It seems like Honda-Nissan merger and tariffs, what we talk about every week. But so it sounds like there will be a 25% tariff come the start of April on anything imported to the US. And that includes Canada and Mexico. We already knew for Canada and Mexico, that was sort of the idea. But this is now everything. I believe Europe has a 10% import fee, and there are existing import tariffs on certain countries already, but this is sort of a much higher broad. This is the chicken tax that caused such an uproar in the 80s. I mean, it still exists, but how many manufacturers sell a small pickup in the US that don't build them there because of this? So I don't know. It's gonna hurt consumers in the US. There's no two ways about it. Short term to medium term, because if like the goal apparently is to make all the manufacturing come to the US, well, that's not going to happen this year. It's not going to happen probably in 3 years. There's such a long planning of building a plant and switching model lines. So can people stick it out till then? I mean, I guess it's good if you have a plant, but some model lines could just disappear from the US if they're European or Japanese or Korean built exclusively.
Yeah, I think you probably know Sam Abdul-Samad. He's a analyst around the Detroit area. Everybody, really respects his work. Some of the figures he's estimated is that $8,000 to $10,000 increase on your average price for a new vehicle, and he's estimating, and Sam is usually pretty good about this stuff, that 2 million vehicles could just get peeled right off the annual sales tally, which is about 16 and a half, which is, I would say, a pretty good year historically. We haven't always had good years lately with just inflation and COVID and all that, but 16 and a half is a pretty healthy market. So you peel 2 million off of that and they're more expensive. That's going to be, very not good situation for consumers at all. And I think, as a consumer, you like to have different types of choices. We just talked about the Ioniq 5, and it's a good thing for consumers to get to have this different kind of car, this, different technology. So it's going to be wild. We'll see. I mean, I believe there were tariffs supposed to go into effect like February 1st, and those got rolled back. So, who knows? Maybe these won't go into place, but I mean, I guess we'll see. And then there's like a 10% tariff on vehicles from China, which we'll see if that actually were to take place as well. I don't frankly quite get, I'm sure you don't get either, why, the North American vehicles are tariffed at a higher rate. In the case of China, we do know that like the Chinese government heavily incentivizes their industry, the automotive industry. So, I mean, that's an interesting, argument there, but I mean, I don't know. It's crazy town.
Well, my understanding is China will go to 25% as well, which yeah. And I mean, they only do all products, and I know people don't realize the huge top name tire companies. A lot of those tires are coming from China. Mm-hmm. People just see the tire name and figure out I want a Chinese tire. Well, some are made in America still and other places, but I think back to the auto industry, every major foreign manufacturer has at least one plant in the US. Yeah. So I'm wondering if they're just going to have to sort of make them all flex lines where they build sort of the American cars there, which is not really doing anything for the economy. You're just switching, and all the exports that your region got from those cars aren't going to happen anymore. Like you're in Detroit and I'm up here in Toronto in Canada. So we have a very sizable auto industry in Ontario. If we can't send them to the States, I don't know what'll happen. But what I do know is Canada has a pseudo free trade agreement with Korea and Japan. So we could start building cars here to ship to other places. So it's not like our plant's going to disappear, or just sort of, well, it could, but if it doesn't, they could just shift priorities. The Ford plant, which is like, I can almost see out my window. When they built the Edge, it was 30 something countries they built it for. Like it wasn't just Canada and the US. So again, like I think if this was 100% in and it stayed 10 years, the dust would settle and everyone would be okay. But it's how are we going to get to that point?
I think that's a really good point too. And when you talk to car executives, that's what they want. They want consistency and they want certainty. They almost don't even care what the rules are. Like they may or may not like the rules, but once they know what they are, they can adjust. And when you look at product cycles that are like, say the 3 to 5 years, ballpark it, you've got to develop the product, and then you got to figure out where you're going to build it. And then where will that, production go? Is it for the domestic market? Will it be, shipped to different, international markets? So all those things come into play much more than just, oh, hey, you're going to build this type of the Silverado in Detroit instead of Mexico. It's very layered for automakers.
And people are like, well, I just won't buy the tariff cars. Automakers in any huge business, it's not like this car is not going to be adjusted and that one's going to have 25%. They're not going to tell you what it is, but they will build it in their whole lineup. There's a reason why delivery charges are standard across the board, even if the car is down the street compared to in the other corner of the continent, because it's like consistency. It's easier to spread. So, like let's say a Civic gets a 25% and Accord doesn't. Well, maybe the Civic only goes up like 13 and then the Accord creeps up 12 and you're making the difference there. So it's just not good news for anyone, but unless you're a business person, way up there.
If you're a consumer, it's not good for you because it's going to impact your choices, and the choices that you do have, you're going to pay more. So, I mean, most economists don't look at tariffs as an effective way to regulate free markets.
Not anymore. Not with the way everything's so globalized these days. Yeah. I mean, back in the day, maybe, but anyway, we will move on so we don't keep people on for too long. So we're going to take a quick break on the Auto Guide show brought to you by eBay Motors. And Greg and I will be back to discuss floor mats, I think, this week, right?
Floor mats.
And then we'll take another break and we will have someone on who I know really well that is responsible for getting those car noises in video games, which to me as a car person and a video gamer is very intriguing. So we'll be back in a couple seconds. Swapping out your tires? There's nothing like it. With eBay, you'll find the feel you're looking for, from smooth highway rides to grip for rough terrain. Get all the tires you need at prices you'll love. eBay, things people love. All right, welcome back. So, like I said, we are going to talk floor mats, and it is a very timely discussion because floor mats are good all year round, but especially in the winter and where Greg and I live are salt covered, slush filled roads, especially with all this current weather. Um, they're a good investment if you plan on keeping your car pristine or maybe selling it down the road. I mean, carpet floor mats that come standard with your car look nice and they do a bit of a job, but once they get wet, it's just gonna just gonna hold water, get your pants wet. So yeah.
That's a really good point. I'm a big fan of rubber floor mats. I just tend to think like, especially like I have a young kid, he's always dropping things on the floor. It's just the cleanup is easier. Like a vacuum, sure, you can get 60% of the stuff up on a carpet. With the rubber stuff, you just pull it out, you vacuum it, you dump it over, you hose it off. Lots of different ways to do that. And we've got, I tell you what, you got to check out our list here, best car floor mats. This is pretty thorough. We've got we've got about 10 of them in all shapes or sizes, all different kinds of floor mats if you're interested. I think it comes down to how much do you want to pay for your floor mats? That's the first part of it. Is this the part of the car you want to spend your money on, or do you want to, maybe go for some LED headlight upgrades or something? I don't know, or some new rims. But it's a good selection.
Yeah, to that point, I also have always liked rubber even before I had my son or dog. I mean, now it's a no-brainer, but because the way our winters are, and you would get salt stains everywhere in the car, and now I would maybe get some around the corners, but I could just take the mat out in the spring and hose it down and scrub it with some car wash soap and dry it off, and off I went. I would always go to the stores where I could get generic ones. There's a certain store in Canada that everyone goes to. I'm sure there's some in the US, and I did that for many cars. The Genesis Coupe, as I've mentioned on a podcast last year, I got WeatherTech ones in there, and I have some in my wife's Crosstrek, and they're much more expensive, but having had them for 2 years, it's really worth it because the higher sidewalls trap more of the salt and dirt from getting on the carpet. And you'd think they're full rubber, the water would just sit there and pool and it would slosh around, but it doesn't. I don't know where it goes or how, but I'm a big fan. And they just pop out in the spring, wash them down, and then they look almost new again. So I think it's one of those things you don't want to spend money on it because your car already has them. And if you figure, okay, I guess I have to, you're just going to go with the cheapest thing, put some money in. There's a difference in quality.
Especially if you've maybe had your car for a while, and you want to try to think, how can I keep this not being like a 6, 7, 8-year-old used car? There's ways to keep it feeling newer, and a decent set of floor mats is one of them. I mean, like you, I've tested a fair amount of WeatherTech, and I think they are, they're not cheap, but they're very good. I think, are they laser designed or printed or something? They have one of those things.
Yes,
and you feel the laser cut. Yes, you see the craftsmanship that goes into them. You can, if you check out our list, there's budget options. There's one called the BDK Universal Fit, which will fit most cars, most vehicles. So you could definitely pay less if you'd like to do that as well. And sometimes things like Costco will randomly have like a good deal on them or something.
Nowadays, they seem to, like, the big companies make mats for every car, but back in the day they didn't. I would get those universal ones and they'd have the different rubber tabs you could cut off to make it fit. And that was always a big plus to get those in. And sort of a trick that I'm sure a lot of people know, but for some reason we hear it on our channel all the time. People are obsessed about resale value when they're buying a brand new car. Like, I just don't get why you're buying a new car just to figure how you're going to sell it down the road. But to make it look more new is, I do this with all our cars, is the mats that come from the factory, they go in my garage the day it comes home when I put in rubber ones. And any wear and tear on the actual carpet or the rubber or whatnot, when you put those floor mats back in, it kind of covers it up and they're brand new. So they look great. It makes the car look so much nicer inside.
That's hilarious. We did the same thing. My wife's 2017 GMC Acadia, we literally took the floor mats out. Strangely, the dealer threw in like an extra set of floor mats. So we swapped the rubber ones, which were, I guess they're not GMC OEM, but they're kind of like it, we threw those in there, and that's where like we spill the milkshakes, the dog pukes, all the stuff goes there. And then if and when we sell this thing, well, hey, we'll throw those carpet ones back in, and when that day comes, maybe we'll get an extra $1,000. Probably not for the resale value. We'll see.
You never know. So just before we wrap this up, one important point that anyone who didn't live through the mid 2000s maybe doesn't know, but if you buy a aftermarket floor mat, remove your floor mat that's in there, as we have said, because if you start doubling or tripling up, all you're doing is raising the floor, which for gas pedals and brake pedals, they can kind of push underneath those mats, and then when it wants to spring back up, it won't because the mat's stopping it. And then your car suddenly has the gas floored all the time.
One quick thing too, if you scroll to the bottom of our piece here, we offer you some tips on how you can maintain and clean your floor mats. And vacuuming them out once a month, if you're doing carpet, that's great. If you're going with a rubber variety, baking soda, which is actually frankly good for cleaning literally anything from your refrigerator to your bathroom sink, that'll do the trick here too. So, it's important to clean these things out because that salt, especially late February, oh man, it's salty, I think, in most of my cars right now. So,
oh yeah, the outside, the inside. All right, well, thanks for joining us again, Greg. Though you're here this whole week, but we'll take a bit of a longer break on the Auto Guide show brought to you by eBay Motors. And when we come back, we will talk to the video game sound designer. Picture this. You're in the garage, your favorite room in the house, and you're tuning up your engine with parts you found on eBay. Every piece is just locking perfectly into place. You step back to admire your work, hands covered in grease, and because you're committed to driving that thing further than the odometer can handle, you start to think to yourself, you know what, I could probably also use some new brakes, some shocks and struts, and this baby deserves a new air filter. So you head right back to eBay. You can find any part you need there, it's unreal. From wipers and headlights to cold air intakes, exhaust systems, and even that turbo you've had on your mind, eBay is the stocked garage of your dreams. And you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. Because eBay knows DIY fixes can be major, and mods are always intense, so you need to know that these parts guaranteed to fit every time before you dive in wrench first. And in the off chance you order a part and it doesn't fit, send it back, simple as that. You know what you love more than the car itself is driving it. You're serious when it comes to engine maintenance, and you're locked in when you're headed into a build. And that's exactly why you start with eBay, minor fix or complete overhaul. You want to get your ride back on the road, and you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. So eBay created My Garage, where all you have to do is add your ride's info and get the exact parts that fit. When you see the green check, you're a click away from that part clicking perfectly into place. So now that you know all that, imagine standing at that open garage door looking at your car you love more than anything, knowing that anything is possible. Whether it's keeping it on the road forever or turning it into something that's never been on the road before. Because with eBay, your garage just got a whole lot bigger. Get all the parts you need at prices you love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Welcome back. We have a special guest this week who comes from an industry we usually don't get to cover on the show. If you could just introduce yourself and what you do.
My name is Ryan Henwood, and I'm a senior sound designer at Ubisoft Toronto.
Yes, and the reason we wanted to have you on the show is you don't just do any sound. Well, you do a lot of sound, but you get to do sound for cars, which as a video game player myself has always fascinated me because I'm old and I remember the days when it was just a single tone on a Commodore to what we have today. So how do you go about capturing a vehicle nowadays? Is it all done in studio? Do you get live samples? How does it work?
Well, it can be really broken down to like a lot of pieces, right? It's not just engine sounds, but like in an open world game, you're dealing with like suspension sounds, impacts, engine, smashing windows, wheels on different materials, skids, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot that really goes into it. But with engines, there is like a lot of libraries that you can go and get stuff from. But when I worked on Watch Dogs Legion, I also was able to go out and record some of the car engines myself, which was the first time that I got to do that, and was a really kind of exciting challenge to work through.
So Watch Dogs Legion, that's not licensed cars, right? It's just sort of generic cars you're driving around?
Yes.
So you just
They
got
kind of
sounds
look
of
like stuff, but not real. Yeah.
so like Grand Theft Auto style.
Yeah.
So you just need to get like small car pickup, like things like that, just to sort of match the vehicle size or whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. Like one of the interesting things on that project was kind of because it was supposed to be futuristic, they really were talking about like, oh, we'll make them all electric, and it's like, well, that's gonna kind of sound boring. So we kind of had to, a bunch of them we worked a little bit more hybrid-ish, so we could have both a combustion engine sound and an electric sound. And then other ones were just like older cars that were just straight up combustion engines.
Cool. So, oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, Ryan, how long does it take to make a single sound? You know, like you've got like an engine node or something. Is that like a day project, like weeks? How long does that take?
Well, I would say like after I record the sound or have it available, it takes a little bit because once you have the sound, we use software that takes it and creates it, and it breaks it down inside of a granular synthesis. So it basically takes like acceleration ramp. Usually we try to find ones it's like idle all the way to the top RPM. And what that does is it will then break the entire sound into these little teeny grains. And then when you're playing the game, it'll kind of, if you hold in the same spot, it's not just going to hold the same tone of the engine. It'll like shift really quickly through all the different threads and grains, and that creates a more realistic sound rather than something that's just kind of holding the exact same section. But like once that can be a little bit intricate to try to get to work properly and not sound all weird. But with an engine sound like that, once we kind of get that in and into the game and have all the systems kind of set up in order to follow like the RPM and load and all that stuff, the parameters that we're getting back from the game. Yeah, it could be probably like I could spend an entire day possibly on like one engine. That's like not even, that wouldn't be adding like say like turbos and blow off valves and all that kind of stuff as well, which gets a lot more intricate. But like with Legion, I think I can't remember how many. I think there was like maybe 30 vehicles in that game, and I redid all the engines about 6 or 7 times to get to the what the director wanted in the end. So it's not just like you do it once and you're done. You definitely go through and have like an iteration process.
That's interesting. You actually answered the question I was going to ask, is like, how do you get it from sound to computers? So they have programs that break it down now. Because I mean, car games back in the day, they just used whatever they could to try to make it sound car-like. And then the more hardcore racing games, I've been sampling sound or trying to straight up use them for years. But it's crazy. We've got to the point where games that cars aren't the focal point are also doing the same thing now. I guess it's just what's expected with the graphics and the realism these days.
Yeah, like sometimes too, like they'll instead of using the granular synthesis, you can go through and like use loops. So if you have an engine at different RPM sections, you can have them crossfading between each other and use like a pitch shifting in between to kind of create a smooth up and down. But I find that the granular synthesis is a little bit of a better way to go, in my opinion.
Yeah, so is that the same thing that all the most popular big franchises are using for racing games? Is that sort of where we're taking the technology from?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe it's probably some kind of granular synthesis stuff. I think with not Grand Theft, but Gran Turismo, I think they have like their own proprietary software that they use everything and run everything through. But I would assume it would be some kind of granular synthesis involved in that.
Yeah, I play a game quite often now that I won't name, that has a loop sound for the trucks and nonstop. And I mean, it has a bit of RPM up and down, but after a while, you're like, come on, I'm not just cycling through the same band over and over again. But that game's not about sound. So as you mentioned, it's more than just car noises, which, yeah, I mean, totally makes sense. But I wasn't even thinking of, like you said, suspension creaks, or if something's damaged, like a bumper dragging on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
So do the designers come to you and say, look, we need noises for all these things? Or do you kind of get a demo of the game and figure out, okay, got to make that make a sound, got to make that make a sound?
It kind of goes both ways a little bit. Like the vehicle team, which would have like designers and programmers and all that on it, they would have specific features that they would want to push on the cars, and then I would kind of have to work with them on to cover the sound for those. Or other times, like I'll just be like, oh, I want to put sound on that and make that a little bit of an extra piece. Like on Legion, they decided to do like a parts destruction kind of thing. So like you could like, if you hit the door would like pop open, but it actually had like 3 stages of health. So we like popped open, popped a little bit more open, then like kind of like shaking back and forth, and then like falling off. But that was like doors, fenders, bumpers, trunk, hood, all that stuff. So each one of those had to have like multiple sounds per multiple health states. Um, and I think like a lot of times like they were doing that because that's visually it's going to look great, but then on my side it's like, oh, okay, well I need to support that, or sometimes there's some things like even like turbos where that really you can't see that, so they don't think about that. But that'd be something like I would be like, oh no, this car I like to have like a big blow off valve on that or something like that to make it sound cooler, and that would be all on me.
I'm just curious, how did you get into this? It seems like a very cool gig, and how did you get into this? What's a typical day like for you?
So how I got into it, like I got out of college and I was I worked in film and television for over 10 years. And then I started kind of getting into the indie game scene and did like three or four indie games. And then I was able to get into Ubisoft Toronto. Actually started as a boom op on their motion capture stage, and then moved up to become a sound designer upstairs. And when it came to the Watchdog Legion project, we were leading that project in Toronto, so we got to kind of make more of the decisions on who got to work on what and who got kind of what kind of mandate. And the audio director chose me to do the cars. I think mainly because like no one else really knew much about cars, and some people were just not even interested in tackling that challenge. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. So I'd love to get on all that.
For people listening, they won't know this, but Ryan and I have known each other for, well, our entire lives. I think there's pictures from our parents of babies in the same playpens. Grew up on the same street. So yeah, you and I always had a huge interest in cars and video games, which we always joke about. Like I drive cars for a living and Ryan gets to make video games. Like we're two teenagers that never grew up. But yeah, I think having both of that, games and cars, is like you said, you're the only one who would know because you've experienced them all. And you can tell when you get into a game where they don't care about the cars. And I played some sort of like crime boss type game, and there was driving, and I was like, this is gonna be so cool. And the driving physics and sound and everything was so terrible. I was like, well, this, like, what's the point? Like you can't just sorry, I was gonna say, you just can't fake it anymore. Like the games are way too advanced.
Yeah, the feeling too, like is really important. Like that's not something that I do, but like the designers and that control all the physics and everything involved on the cars. It's really intricate kind of stuff, and like and it can really depend too on like what location that you're going to be driving the cars in. Like if it's a wide open area, then yeah, you're going to want them to go a lot faster. But like if it's in a really tight city and tight corners and parked cars on the street and stuff like that, like having a super fast car, a lot of players might find that really difficult to get around, and just tend to actually just like not want to play it because it's just too hard.
Yeah,
so that balance.
Yeah,
I'm just curious where your automotive interests lie. Do you have any interest in cars in your garage? Anything you had growing up? Anything you aspire to have someday? I think it's always kind of cool to figure out, like your Miata or whatever you're interested in.
Yeah, actually, it was that my older brother has had that kind of car bug a little bit more than me. I definitely was into them when I was a teenager in my early 20s and stuff like that. Like my brother had a Honda Accord that he had got. Like he did an engine swap, so he had like a Prelude engine in. He changed the transmission from an automatic to a standard. It was lowered and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of fun.
Until it got stolen.
Actually, that was the other Accord. That was my parents' Accord that got stolen. They came back for his, but he had a car alarm on it. So
You're not doing the Accord justice. That he he swapped in the Prelude engine, the manual transmission, and an Accord coupe, and it was one of the early '90s, like the more square sort of style. And this was before it was a thing where everyone wanted to modify cars. Like obviously it's way before Fast and Furious, but even before like Gran Turismo or any of that stuff. So I remember it was like, whoa, you're doing a lot to your car? That's weird. And then I get a bit older and I'm like, I want to do that to my car.
Yeah, it was really fun. I did kind of sneak it out a couple of times to have some fun without him knowing. But yeah, I mean, after that, for myself, didn't really have any fun cars, unfortunately. My uncle was into like antique cars, so he every few years he would swap out what he had. I remember he had at one point the first year of the Cadillac Eldorado.
Wow.
And the thing was just huge. Like it barely fit in his garage. And I remember one time he was working on it and he found like this button in the glove compartment, and he couldn't figure out what it was for, and he kind of had to trace it all the way back into the engine bay, and it went to a siren. So he figured out it was like a fire chief's car originally.
Fancy.
Yeah, it was pretty wild.
I would have gone with cigarette lighter or something in the Eldorado, but
It's funny. My uncle had a 58 Caddy at one point. Same thing. He kind of goes through different antiques, and he had a 2-car garage, and he had to angle it to make it fit, take up both bays and put it sideways almost, and it barely fit. It was like touching the walls and touching the door when it goes down.
Yeah, and those are such great cars, and I think in the end, like I was just kind of more surrounded by cars and people that were interested in cars than me actually being able to go in and say tinker with stuff on my own, or really owning any kind of project cars or anything like that. Unfortunately, I wanted to, but I just didn't have the finances for it, probably.
Just 2 quick things. He was my ride to high school in base manual Civic. Like a 96 probably, something like 95.
Yeah, I think it was like a 96 4-door.
Baby blue.
Yeah, it's like this like tealy blue. I got that was my first car, and I got it so I could get like it was hard to find because I wanted to get a stick shift. I didn't want an automatic, and so yeah, I didn't have a whole lot of practice because the only other thing I could practice on was my brother's car, which was very different with a short shifter and the engine swap to going to that. So I definitely peeled the wheels out of the dealership when I took it home.
I think part of why you probably never owned project cars or modified cars is you saw all the terrible financial decisions I kept making. You realized it probably wasn't a good idea. My Alero days and my Camaro days.
Alero.
Yes. Yeah.
The Camaro. That's right. You had a Camaro in Toronto.
Yeah. Speaking of Camaros, that was sort of my first taste of a cool car because, as I've said on the show before, I'm like the only car person in my family, minus my uncle, but we aren't even in the same city. So, my parents had boring cars. But Ryan's dad had a Camaro for what, a year? And he got rid of it?
Oh, it was
like,
no more than 2 years. It was
like
one winter.
IROC, right? Or Z28?
It was an IROC Z, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like one winter with cinder blocks in the trunk. And he was like, yeah, forget it.
Yeah, this predates the day where people would get winter tires, whereas if he had such a thing, he probably wouldn't fine. But can you imagine performance tires on a Camaro in like the snow we have right now? Like, yeah, game over.
What year was this beast? Like we're talking like 85, 86, something like that, a little bit later.
Yeah, probably 85, between 85 and 89 probably.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we were pretty little. Like I just remember it existed, and then I remember more because there's a picture in his house of it when we were a bit older. But yeah, since we're sticking with games, we can reminisce about some of the originals that kind of got here. I remember we used to play. I can't remember the name. I've looked it up 1,000 times and I always forget again. On your Commodore, like where you drove the car and then you hit the dirt patches and then the pavement, you had to go in the pits, and it was like the most rudimentary game, but
I did look it up and found it one time and I forget now.
And then in like I guess it was the Genesis days when we finally got like some like proper race games. I remember you and I used to play Ayrton Senna Grand Prix 2 all the time. That was such a great game. It was so ahead of its time, and you go back and look at it now, you're like, It's so bad. But
I don't
at
know
the
how I
time, it was
played it
amazing.
so many times.
Yeah, it's so repetitive and boring. But oh, sorry if you hear my dog. Just saw a mailman outside, I think. So back to existing cars and whatnot. This engine database you're talking about fascinates me. I want to hear that. I want to get access to this one day and see what's in there. For the other noises, though, it's not like you can go out and smash a car into a wall or break a windshield. So is that also a database, or do you get to like sort of like in the old movies, fake it? You break like a beer bottle and pretend it's a window or something.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the part of my job is not just like grabbing stuff from libraries. Like we use the libraries for a lot of stuff, but we tend to layer things to create them more interesting and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, with certain things like destruction stuff, sometimes we're able to get like a budget, and we do go out and do the field recording ourselves. And other things which would prove, I mean, we could probably get it done, but I don't know if we could go it and try to like drop a car from a crane or something like that. Like there's quite an industry on people who just make sound libraries that do end up doing this stuff and then selling it so that we don't have to try to figure out how to do it, which worked out really great. But then we'll layer that in to a bunch of other additional things as well. There's a couple of sound designers that are very focused on just cars and performance cars and how they record that. And then that's what I'm trying to learn a little bit from them, because there's so many different ways to say record the engines and all the other parts of the car as well. But the engines are usually the most important, because it kind of gives the character to the car and gives you that sense of if it's performance or not performance, and makes it interesting.
Well, when my Genesis dies, you have full permission to drop it from a crane for science purposes, as long as I get to watch. What you were just talking about actually brought up a great point. Again, how far games advance. So I know I should have played it, but I didn't play Legion's Watchdog. Is there multiple viewpoints for the car? Because you need to have like an interior car noise and a chase noise and a bumper noise. And so do you have to worry about all that in that game?
And that one we didn't. They took out the interior camera,
Okay.
so it was only exterior. But a lot of games will have to take in account for interior versus exterior. I mean, there's a couple of things you can do. Like the really easy way to do is you could just take the exterior sound and just kind of low pass it. So you just take out all the high frequencies, just so it sounds kind of muffled when you're inside. But there is things where you can go and actually get recordings where they recorded the exterior of the car and the interior at the same time, and in that way, when you can set those up so that when you change the cameras, it'll turn on and off the exterior and interior, and it can be a little bit more realistic.
Just one more question. I'll let Greg get in here. When you said different ways to record an engine, I mean, like my entire life I've been playing racing games, so that's a good one too, because sometimes you play games and you're like, I only hear exhaust, I don't hear any engine, and other times, more often than not, you hear engine and no exhaust, and it's like, yeah, that's what it sounds like if you're under the hood. But no one's under the hood. What do I hear in or behind the car? Like if you're driving like a Toyota Corolla and it sounds like it has like 6 independent throttle bodies on a 4-cylinder, and it like makes no sense. So that is a lot to consider, I guess, with sort of the demands gamers have.
Yeah, like so with some cars, like or in some recording ways, so people will actually strap the microphones to a car and have like a racetrack, and they'll drive it around doing like different cornering things and whatnot. That's also a great way to record like wheels and skids and squeals and stuff like that. When I did my record session, I went with the more of like the stationary method. So you would end up using like a dyno so that the tires can move and add load to the engine, but stay in the same place so it's easier to record it. And I was able to find a guy just a little bit north of Toronto who has Dynapacks, which are even better because like those ones you you take the wheels off and you put the Dynapacks on where the wheels are, and so they're actually very quiet when you're recording. Where if you had like a dyno drum, you would get the sound of the dyno drum as well, which is doable, but not the best that we can get. So I was able to get him to travel with the Dynapacks to a place that I could record in, and then have the cars that I had sourced as well, which was pretty cool because there was a lot of cool cars I got to record.
Yeah, no, that's a good point about the drum, or if you have fans on and whatnot, because you need perfect sound. I mean, when I'm doing these podcasts or my videos, I can never get perfect sound. I have okay microphones because I mean we're not going to get professional stuff, but even still, I'm trying to keep some sound off. But when you get sort of one shot at it because you can't update it later, must be very important.
Yeah.
All right, you got any more questions for him, Greg?
That's just been really fascinating to kind of get a peek inside this world, Ryan. It's cool. It's also interesting to hear sort of a little bit of Mike's origin story here. So it's been actually fun to kind of sit and just listen and frankly get to know both you guys a little bit better. I am a little curious just poking around the Ubisoft site. I know you've got there's the Snowdrop engine, which I can only assume is like the weather. It seems like right now, at least where I am, all just the snow. But I'm curious about the Performance Capture Studio, which just seems like a fancy name for a really cool place to work. What's it like to do that? I mean, kind of tell me about it.
Yeah, I started boom mopping down there before becoming a full sound designer there, and so basically the motion capture stage they is when we'll bring in actors and animals, because we motion capture animals as well, and we put little sensors all over them, and then we have all these special cameras set up in the area, and it records all of the sensors on the body. So I'm not a professional in motion capture, but what they'll do is basically they take all of that, and then it goes through a whole process through the animation department and whatnot, and that they turn all that into how everybody moves and interacts in the games. I think that they also include they have a facial camera, so they also do facial scans, and you get all the movement of your face and your mouth and your eyes and everything as well.
I'm curious, what is the hardest thing or being to get sound from? Car, animal, what's the hardest thing to sort of get audio
Human.
for? Human, yeah.
Yeah, I with recording dialogue, we have a position called voice designers, and they take care of all the recording of all the dialogue in the game, and
cool.
that is actually very heavy and very time consuming, because you can have anywhere from 20,000 to 130,000 dialogue lines in a game. So that takes a lot of time to record and then process and master and then get into the game and stuff like that. So they have a very busy job.
And I imagine, like you were describing with the environment the car is driving in, same with the dialogue. You have to, I guess, match it to if they're outside or if they're inside or if they're in a tight room or.
So yeah, with that stuff, most of the time, I guess the same with recording cars is that you always try to record it as pristine as possible, and then we kind of let the game, because we set up volumes for reverb and EQ and stuff like that, so that when you take that pristine sound and put it into different rooms throughout the game, then it changes to sound like you're in that room.
Well, next time you work on one of these games where you need generic car noises and you need a turbo car with a way too loud turbo and way too loud blow-off valve that is actually really slow, I have the perfect car for you. And then I can say, hey, that's my car in that game.
Which one's that? Which one do you have?
The Genesis. The
Genesis. Nice.
Yes, with this podcast, we twice through 2 series modified it. So it looks a lot nicer and it drives better, but we didn't really ever touch the engine, and it's a little tired. It wasn't that powerful to begin with, but it's loud. But yeah.
Nice. So yeah, one of the cars I got to record at the end was one we just kind of decided just to throw on the dynos because we were like, oh, they're here, we got another hour, let's do it. was this like older uh, BMW. I think it was a 325i, and the thing was in a little bit of rough condition. Like the dashboard was missing, there was no seats in it and stuff like that. And we did the first pull on it, and all this white smoke started coming out the back. And I had like, I had all my microphones around the tailpipe, and there's another guy that had microphones in the engine, but like there was all this smoke coming out, and I was like, because what we would do is we would do it like at least three pulls, because then we would have like at least a couple of options to make sure that if something distorted or something happened, that we would have other takes. And I was like, can we do two more? Like, is that okay? They're like, yeah, that'll probably be fine. It's like,
Check the
probably be fine.
check the coolant. Check
Yeah,
the coolant
yeah.
reservoir, because clearly the head gasket's no longer there. It was
Yeah,
burning
with
coolant out.
my microphones were a little damp after those ones. Um, but yeah, it was fun. That, and like there was we did a GTR R33 that did a couple backfires, and the
Nice.
microphones were a little black after that. I had to clean them off a bit.
Slightly off topic, but speaking of Skylines, does your brother still have his?
Yeah, he does. We recorded his too, so his GTR R32. Yeah, he still got it.
Is it a
Beautiful.
GTR? I thought it was a GTS R with like with an engine swap, or did he get rid of that?
No, no, it's a GTR. I think he put on like a twin turbo on it, I think.
Nice.
Yeah, there's footage somewhere I think he had of, because he originally lived in Japan when he bought it, and he used to go to a GTR meetup at the Suzuka racetrack every year, and so he's got a couple of videos of him like driving Suzuka with his car.
I like how you just casually like he did this, and it's like for us and a lot of our listeners, it's like, oh, we got to drive a GTR in Suzuka. Like
Oh,
that's
I
like
know,
a dream
it's
to do.
incredible. Don't get me wrong.
You're
Yeah.
really kind of downplaying it there, like it's like
Sorry.
this like bucket list kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I,
An
I
original
was not
R32.
there and didn't get to experience, so I definitely am jealous as well.
I think maybe I remembered this wrong. He went to Tsukuba, I think, too, right?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I should ask
That's the
him.
track I think I'd want to start at and work my way up.
Yeah.
That's a little more manageable.
just
Not
level
as
up the
difficult.
Suzuka right off, you know.
Yeah.
Getting a 300 horsepower car with no electronic aids and go for it right away. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and all this great info. And I know you're probably working on new projects that when they come out one day, we'll have to get you back on and discuss. But for now, if they want to see
Sure.
your work, go get Watchdog Legion. And we will hopefully talk to you again.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, that was pretty informative and a lot of fun. It made the job sound just as cool as I thought it would be and gave me some more insight. So this episode's going on, so we'll just quickly wrap it up with what's next. This is where Kyle and I talk about what's coming up. But since he's not here, I'll quickly cover for both of us. He is driving a Genesis GV80 Coupe, which he just wanted to review this week. And then it turned out he had a trip where he had to drive from Toronto to Montreal, about a 5-hour drive in the dead of winter, probably in snow. So the timing worked out really well. So he'll get a good review on that with some real world highway miles. I have the Mercedes CLA 45S AMG, and it's one of those cars that I haven't driven probably in a decade, since the 35, and I drove a 35 recently, so I've never sampled the 45. It's such a kind of forgotten about, underrated car. Like, it's a 2-liter 4-cylinder making a 416 horsepower. Like, that's insane. I remember when people's minds were blown when the Evo and STI could make 300 back in the day. Like, and it's not like nothing, and then at 5,000 it comes alive. There is power throughout, and I'm just having a blast, even in these snowy, wet, slushy roads, because the 4MATIC, when you put it one in sports modes, is pretty rear bias. And that's all I'll say about it for now. Next week we have a fun comparison. The Mini Countryman SE, the all-electric Countryman, is going up against the Volvo EX30 twin motor. So 2 all-wheel drive small little SUVs that are all electric. Do you have anything coming up, Greg?
Let's see. I drove the Mazda CX-50 Meridian edition, which was kind of cool. I really enjoyed that. That's going to go up on the site next week. I wrote up some thoughts on that. And then down the road, I recently have signed up for the Land Cruiser 1958 edition. So I'm pretty psyched about that. I actually hope the snow sticks around a little bit, because I've been in all these different things that are capable-ish, hey, I've got something that I could really drive up a snowbank with. I'm hoping for snow next week. So I'm pretty psyched. The Land Cruiser is a very interesting thing. I think now that it's evolved from what it was to this current form, a week-long test is going to be my most extended time with it. So I'm pretty psyched.
I fully expect in the review photos of you at your local shopping center with the Land Cruiser parked in a snowbank, half up in the sky like Jeeps and Land Cruiser and 4Runners people like to do.
We'll do my best, intentionally or not. We'll try to do that, right?
All right, well, that's it for this week. We will be back next week with some more guests and the news of the week, and Greg will be back with some more products. So until then, we'll see you later. Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay, because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything: brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need, and it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you order the right thing. All the parts you need at the prices you'll love, guaranteed fit every time. eBay, things people love.